Hey, let's stand up together. Will you just stand up? We're powering through the post-lunch kind of laze. All right, I don't know how touchy-feely your culture is, but I'm going to do just an uncultural thing. Turn to your left. Will you, everybody turn to your left? Put your hands on the shoulders of the person in front of you. Give them a shoulder rub. Give them a shoulder rub. All right, all right, all right. Yes, yes. All right, turn the opposite direction and return the favor. All right, good. You can have a seat. How many of you are glad we did that? You know, I always come to a meeting like this hoping to get one nugget that I can go home with, and I hope that already that you have a nugget, and if not, we'll see if we can find one. Let me talk about two things real quick, okay? Because I now realize what Sebastian was wanting to push me into earlier, and I just was clueless on. I talked about why plant, and so let me give just a minute on why plant, and then we'll do another couple of minutes on just planning for growth. Tim Keller has a great book. He's got a lot of great books, but a great book out called City Church. Has anybody read that or seen that? Really, really good. Very thick, very deep theologically. You may agree with some of it, others of it you may not, which is okay. You know, it's fine. I don't agree with all of it theologically because the only one that has full knowledge of theology is me. And he doesn't agree with me on some things. So I don't agree with him on some things, but he's a lot smarter than I am also. But he's got some really good stuff. And there's a chapter on church planting that I've read probably 8 to 10 times. It's pretty incredible. He gives some statistics, okay? New church plants are 6 to 8 times more effective in evangelism than existing churches. Do we have this up here? Okay, I'm not going to go through everything that's up there, but I'll look at that. 6 to 8 times more effective at evangelism than existing churches of the same size. Just get that in your head. They study this. New church plant, 6 to 8 times more effective. There are a lot of reasons for that. The average new church gains 1/3 to 2/3 of its members from the unchurched. Okay? 1/3 to 2/3. Where do they get the rest of their members? From people that are already churched. Okay? Just happens. And then churches over 10 to 15 years in age gain 80 to 90% of their new membership by transfer growth. Now, I'm not going to preach against that. It happens. You know, you have, in your town, you have lots of churches. We walk by several churches here. And some churches, because of the political government, or some because of a change in pastoral leadership, or for whatever reason, they cease preaching a life-giving gospel. And so hungry sheep will go to another church. And that's just the way that it is. That happens. And so if a church is 10 to 15 years old, most of the new people that are coming in are coming from another church. It's transfer growth. When you have a brand new church, 1/3 to 2/3 of the people are coming from either a de-churched or an unchurched background. So as we look at the communities that we're in, we've got to ask ourselves, what does God see? And what is going to be the judgment standard when I stand before the Lord someday and give an account for what He's given me? Because we're all going to do that. I think about that a lot because I'm getting closer to that age. I mean, we never know when we're going to be there. It could happen at any point. But I've been pastoring Seacoast for 25 years, and right now we're in the process of transitioning to the next generation leadership. Because I want to see Seacoast is a church that has been somewhat effective of reaching my generation. But if it only reaches my generation and a generation or two below, then it will become a museum someday. And I would like for it to be a church that continues to reach next generation. And really the only way I'll do that is if we turn it over to next generation. And so we're in the process of doing that right now. And I'm asking the young leadership to say, recreate this. I mean, the gospel's the same all the time. But the containers of the gospel change all the time. They need to. Recreate this for your generation and the next generation. And I'll be honest with you, I do not like some of the things that are going on. I don't like the music. There's parts of the music I cannot stand. For me, touching God with music is like vineyard music from the 1980s. That's when it was happening, gang. That's when God was moving and, just kind of hang out in the Spirit and all of that. They don't do that. I mean, I do not like some of the music. But you know what? It's not about me. Because if it's about me, it'll look like me, old and crusty, and I get grumpier every year. And I don't want my church to get grumpier every year. And so I'm in charge of basically just, keeping the grumpy people happy, and the young ones are, recreating it, which is good. I don't know where I was going with that, but standing before God. I think God is going to say to me, well done. I think he's proud of me. I really do. I don't live every moment of my day wondering what the Father thinks about me. Father loves me. Father's crazy about me. And I wake up every morning thinking about that the Father just loves me. And so I don't have to run away from the Father. I don't have to prove myself to the Father. He loves me. So I believe someday I'm going to stand before the Lord and he's going to say, well done. And I'm really, really proud of you, Greg, for what you did. But I also wonder if maybe the metrics of what he measures might be a little bit different than mine as it comes to the church as a whole. And there are a lot of different metrics, but I'm wondering if maybe he's not going to measure just Seacoast Church. That, 25 years ago, he started from scratch, and now there's, how many ever people that are coming and lives changing and all that. I wonder if maybe he measures the city and goes, on your watch, let me show you how the percentage of fully devoted followers of Christ, of believers, went up. And how much did it go up or how much did it go down? So I look at my city now, this is really rattling me, and I'm wondering if maybe rather than just looking at, it's easy to measure Seacoast, maybe we ought to even invest in surveys that look at the Charleston area and go, okay, this year, this is the number of believers that were in church, however you measure that. And then next year it's going to be this, and next year it's going to be this, and so that we look at the whole city. And if we look at it that way, I do know that there are some things that will either drive that number up or drive it down. And the primary thing is how many new church plants are there in the city. Church planting is the most effective means of evangelism. We just saw it. Okay, right? Would you agree with that? So, Keller in his book gives 3 scenarios. It's just fascinating. I'm going to be preaching this to everybody because it's what I'm thinking about all the time. He says, let's take 3 cities, okay? And let's say they're City A, City B, and City C, and they're all exactly the same size. I don't know what the number is. Let's put 100,000 on the cities. And they have exactly the same number of churches, 100 churches in those cities. In city number A, there are no churches that have been planted in the last 10 years. Okay? No new churches. What can we know about City A? He says City A will probably have 4 or 5 churches that are going through renewal. That, in other words, they've been there for a while, and God's moving and they're growing. Now, from the statistics that we just read, where's the most of the growth coming from? The other churches. Okay? And it's okay, because in some of the other churches, various things are happening, and God moves sheep around from time to time. And if you're going to last over the long haul as a shepherd, you need to understand, yes, it hurts when people leave, but people come and people go. okay? And if you attach your self-esteem to who comes and who goes, you're going to have a problem. And we all have the same problem, okay? It hurts, and you just put your big boy panties on and plow through it, and it's just going to happen. It happens to all of us, and they're God's sheep, and we do the best that we can. And we preach against those that leave. No, that's not what we do. But there's going to be renewal in 4 or 5. There are going to be some people coming to Jesus fresh, but most are going to be transfer growth. And overall in City A, here's what we know, that the percentage of Christians is going to be in decline. Okay? If that's the case. City B, 100,000 people, 100 churches, and there is one church, I believe, that's being planted, or that's been planted in the last, is that the statistic that I wanted? I've got it written down, I can't remember. 10% of the churches are planted in the last 10 to 20 years, okay? If 10% of the church has been planted in the last 10 to 20 years, there's a brand new church every year. That's the number I wanted. There's a brand new church being planted every year. Okay, now here's what we know. We know that 4 or 5 of the churches are going to be in renewal. And we've got one church every year that's going to be planted that's reaching 6 to 8 times more people than similar churches for the kingdom as far as in being born again. So here's what he says. He says City B is going to be about level and maybe a little bit in decline. Now, in City C, 100,000 people, 100 churches, and there's between 2 and 3 churches are planted every year. Okay? Between 2 and 3 churches, 2 to 3% planted every year. He said in that situation that within 50 or within one generation, the number of believers will increase by 50%. Did you follow that? So the key is new church plants. And so what I have to do is I have to look at my city and I have to say, if we're going to grow, it's going to take more than just Thousand Hills Church growing. Okay? It's going to take church plants. Because if you in church planting, if you insist that all of the churches that are planted look exactly like mine, or campuses or whatever, and I'm a big believer in campuses, that's part of the process. But if they're all going to be just like mine, we're never going to reach all the different generations that are in the church. There have to be different types of churches. And so here's what will kill a church planting movement: territorialism. Territorialism. It's killed every church planting movement that has ever existed on the planet. Let me give you an example in America. One reason, Rodney's a great book. Have you guys read The Rise of Christianity, or The Triumph of Christianity by Rodney Stark? Might be a good one to read. It might make you a little bit mad. He's just a social scientist and a statistician that's studied like how the Jesus movement went from a small band of people to the world's largest religion. And he makes a lot of comments about the difference in Europe and America, and why America there seems to be, a higher percentage of church attendance, and some of that kind of thing, and then what's going on right now. And one of the things that Rodney Stark points out is that in Europe, because of the state church, it created a lazy church. That in where you have to give a part of your money to the government to pay taxes in order to pay the church, that it created a culture that somewhat lazy. You didn't have to, for most of us who plant churches, if new people don't come to your church, the church doesn't exist. But in a state church, that's not necessarily the case. And then he talks about America and how that when America was formed, it was a freedom of religion thing. And so you had church planting everywhere. You didn't have to be afraid that, they were going to kill you because you started a new church that wasn't authorized under whatever. And so there became a lot of church planting. And in America in 1776, 17% of our country was what they would be called religious. 17% in 1776. The Methodists, the Presbyterians, all of the denominations began planting churches like crazy. We want to get churches in every city, in every community, and as they're growing, we want to plant churches. And so by First World War, around the early 1900s, the percentage of Americans that were religious had grown from 17% to almost 60%. And then church planting stopped because the denominations began to say, we don't need another church like ours in our city because we already have one. Territorialism. We're excited about new church plants when they're in somebody else's city. Okay? But kingdom-mindedness is tested when it's planted in my own zip code. Now, I'm not advocating. Let me tell you, that I've talked about this several times, and it's been taken wrong sometimes. I'm not advocating that a staff member at Thousand Hills Church goes across the street and plants a church and say, hey, you ought to be kingdom about it, Sebastian. No. No, that's violating ethical principles of the house, okay? But there may be other organizations, New Frontiers or the Assemblies of God or whatever it happens to be, that say, hey, we need more churches in Hilversum. And the truth is, we do. We need more churches in every community. But when the Assemblies of God or New Frontiers or Vineyard or non-denominational churches say, don't plant any more churches in our city because we've already got enough, I will guarantee you have killed the church planting movement. Okay? So, because every city needs more churches. Seacoast Church, I was a part of a denomination, and a good denomination, and I love them, and I'm now, actively involved in partnering with and helping. But wanted to plant a church in the community that I was in, a community of 45,000 people that I wanted to plant a church in. They already had an existing church of 35 people, and that church vetoed that we could plant a church in that community. Okay, so we planted a non-denominational church in that community. That church still has 35 people. We have 20,000 people. Okay, so would it have been a good thing or a bad thing for us to have not planted in that community? Would have been a good thing for the kingdom of God. And so what I want to encourage you with is we must plant churches. If we cease to plant churches, or if we are not aggressive about planting churches, we will not see the tide lift in our communities. And I believe the Lord wants to lift the tide. And in fact, when God lifts the tide in one church, it lifts the tide in several churches. It makes us all better. It makes us all better when we begin to see that happen. So that's all I want to say about that. That's one of the reasons we're passionate about organizations like the Ark who will band together and plant churches, and we want to challenge you with that. All right, let me real quickly just, let's talk about more practical, where we are and how do we get somewhere else. When you plant a church, most generally, you will plant with, I guess I'm stopping right there. Okay.
Just a quick question about questions. If you have questions on pieces of paper, Kathy, where are you? Kathy will go around and collect those and will give them to me so that we can later on use them during the Q&A session. That's it. Thank you.
You know, the value of having somebody like us come from the outside, we can say things that you can't say. And so if that's all I'll say about that. Okay, so here we go. So you don't have to, how many of you know you don't have to agree with me? You have a right to be wrong, okay? So we plant a church. All of us plant a church. We plant with one service. We almost always plant with one service, right? And we begin to grow that service and grow that service. And whatever facility you are in, if there are life-giving principles going on, and life-giving principles means that the church will grow. And now they don't all grow at the same rate. There are different phases of harvest. And, the harvest, and I'm coming from America, I'm talking big numbers. I was in a meeting not very long ago with pastors from Indonesia, from Latin America, from Africa. And they began somebody said, tell us about, your services in the last month. And they're talking about arenas, 90,000 people, 100,000, 150,000 people, I felt like a really, really small church. And the deal of it is this, is the harvest is different everywhere. And so you don't covet another person's harvest. You don't, resent other harvests. Whatever harvest that you have, you have. The point is we want to be growing. And so as we grow, the building will tend to dictate the size of the harvest that you can have. And it doesn't matter how big the building is. Someday it will dictate, if it's a little building, if it's a big building, if it's a mega building, it will dictate the size of the harvest if you allow it to someday. So what you got to do is you got to go, how can we keep that from happening? Well, you start with one service. When a service grows to a certain size, and we say about 80% of the capacity, it's time to go to a second service. And here's resistance that I see in a lot of places is we don't want to go to a second service. I mean, we so enjoy the first service, and it would be so difficult to go to a second service. Here's something that I absolutely believe. It is much easier to do 2 services than it is to do 1. Much, 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 much easier. You say, well, that'd be too hard. How is it easier? It's easier in a lot of ways. The first way is with volunteers. In fact, now that we have we have 32 services every weekend, but that's in 12 different locations. In the location that I'm at, the original location, we have 8 services. Occasionally, I will want to have, let's rent a great big stadium and have 1 service. And my pastors say, that's a terrible idea. I would love that. I'd love to see thousands of people everywhere, and let's worship Jesus, and this will be wonderful. My pastors say, that's a terrible idea. How are we going to take care of the children? What about the volunteers? Because the volunteers want to be in the service. And when you have 2 services, you can encourage people to serve in one and participate in another. Will everybody do that? No, but lots of people will. What we do is we encourage our volunteers to serve maybe twice a month, and when they do serve, to go to one and to serve in another. Now that we have the internet campus, some of them, attend on internet and serve in a regular service. It's so much easier when you have 2 services than it is 1. It's easier to preach 2 services than it is 1. Anybody here ever preach a really bad message, or am I the only one that does it? Okay? I love it when I preach a really bad message to know that I have another chance. That's wonderful. I have 3 chances. I preach 3 times live every weekend. It puts more hooks in the water or nets in the water. It gives people more options of when they can come to church. You say, well, we do a 2-hour service, and how would we shorten your service? You say, that'll ruin our service. No, it will make it much better. I've been to some of your 2-hour services. It would make it much better. We waste so much time. We waste 10, 15, when you have no constraints on time, I think it's Parkinson's law that says any task will expand to fill the allotted time to do it. If you have 1 hour to do a task, you will fill up an hour. If you have an hour and a half, you will fill up an hour and a half. Your announcements will be forever and a day. Some people are hoping Jesus comes during the announcements so that we don't have to have any more. Okay? They say, are you quenching the Holy Spirit? Absolutely not. You allow room for the Holy Spirit to move. He can do it in an hour and 15 minutes. Or he can do it in 4 hours. But you limit the number of people that will be able to participate with him the longer you go. Okay? And so I think a benefit of 2 services is to make you shorten your service and to be more thinking through what are we spending our time with here and what are the valuable things that we do. I just really do. And when you do, you make room for more people, and it doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to build a bigger building because you can do more services. Now, what we recommend is that as you begin to grow, you do 2 services and fill up 2 services. And I believe that if you do them in the right time, in America, here are the time constraints. In America, most people, even unchurched people, if they're going to go to church, they're going to go in the golden hour is from 11 to 12 on Sunday. You can stretch that from 10 to 12, and that's kind of the golden window. If I can put 2 services within that 2-hour period somehow, and our services are an hour and 15 to an hour and 20, so I hang it off of the first end, we started at 9:30, and off of the second end, which we started at 11:15. If we can get those hours right, we can fill up a building twice. If your building is not being filled up twice, if you have 2 services and one service you have 20 people in, and the other you have 120 people, I can tell you it's one of 2 reasons. One, we're not doing the same things in each service. We don't have children's ministry in one service and we have it in the other. Or we don't have our, choir, if choir is what you do in one service, but we have it in the other. You see what I'm saying? We don't do exactly the same thing. Now, if you're doing exactly the same thing and you still have imbalanced services, it is a reflection of what time we're doing service. We have one time that is a prime time. It's 10:30. And the other one is 8:30. Well, in our situation, 10:30 is always going to be full, and 8:30 is never going to be full. But you balance the times. What we've done is at Seacoast, we have a culture of change. So we change service times just to change service times, just to shake people up. That's all we do. We're going to our summer hours right now. The other day, somebody came up to me and said, we're still on our summer hours from last year. When are we going to go back to our winter hours? I said, well, we like our summer hours right now. They're working good for us. But we change the service times. We'll change them by 15 minutes, tweak them just a little bit in order to balance the services so that we can minister to more people. Does that make sense? And then we suggest that you go to a 3rd service in the same place, most usually. And you'll never fill up a 3rd service all the way. I've never seen it done. Maybe it has. Maybe you do it. But usually a 3rd service is at such off times that maybe 50 to 70% is as full as it's going to get. And you do that. Then we suggest if you're filling up 2 services and then you've got a partially full 3rd service, how about thinking about doing your services in more than one location? That's multi-site. Let me talk just a second about multi-site, because here's the thing many of you are saying right now. That works in America, it will never work in our culture. When we started, here's why we started multi-site. We were going to build a big building. We had 5 services in a small building, no bigger than this, and we had 2,000 people. And we went to our town and we said, would you, I think I already told this story, could we build a bigger building? And they zoned no that we couldn't. And so I had to think about, what can we do? What can we do? We can't build. Do we just stop growing? And it was like the Lord showed me, add another service. And I thought, we've got 5, we're killing our people. And every service that we add, the potential for filling up the service is less and less because it's further off of prime time. And it was, well, how about you do the service in another building? And we just chose a building right across the street, which is not a good idea. I've got a whole talk on that, but we did it because we didn't have any, we didn't know. And so when I told our people that this is what we're going to do, we're going to start a service in a building, in a shopping center just right across the street, and it's going to have a live band, and it's going to have, children's ministry, and it's going to have, a campus pastor, but the teaching's going to be on video because we can't be in 2 places at one time. Here's what I never heard from my church. Pastor, that sounds like a great idea. I never heard that once. Never. Here's what I heard all the time. That'll never work. That'll never work. Guess what? It's working. Right now, I preach to anywhere from 12 to 21,000 people on a weekend, and 60 to 70% of them are at a video location. And you've heard me preach. I am not great. I am a 2. I'm not a 5. I'm a 2, okay? But it works. It works. It works. And for 10 years, for the first 10 years, it wasn't even live. It was 1 week delayed. In other words, if you were in that building across the street, it was last week's message. That'll never work. We grew from 2,000 people to 10,000 people on 1 week delayed. No high definition, no live, no anything. God's creative. Never let the facility dictate the size of the vision. And I don't care whether your facility will seat 50 people or your facility will seat 5,000 people. At some point, it will dictate the size of the vision if you allow it to. So anyway, we could go on and on, but I want you to hear from some of our other people. Is that what we need to do next, Sebastian? I'll just kind of close it there and just encourage you. I believe that some of you are going to break the code on how to reach hundreds and thousands of people in this country and in this community. And we just want to cheer you on. We just want to cheer you on and believe that God's going to do it.